Hi, everyone. Welcome to the international launch of Someone Like Me. Um, we're so excited. My name is Clem Bastow. I'm one of the co-editors of this incredible collection, along with Jo Case, who is asleep. She wasn't going to be here, I have to say. She didn't sleep through her alarm. She wasn't able to make it. But we're so excited that this book is now about to find a new audience. And particularly excited to be joined today by three of the amazing contributors to this new edition, Sarah Cook, Ivy, Lin and Lucy Rose. And also I'd like to give a huge thanks and congratulations to our other international contributors, Fergus Murray, Julie Farrell, and also Nisha Dolan, who is currently sailing to Gaza with the Global Samud Flotilla, which is a pretty good excuse for not being here. And I'd also like to give a really huge thanks to Jenna, Lisa, Ellie, Demi, and the team at Verve Books for their amazing guidance and help as someone like me steps into this new phase of life. I promise I won't talk too much longer, but I thought I would just give you just a bit of an introduction as to kind of how this book came into being. So Jo came to me. I'm a critical autism studies scholar, but I also wrote a book a few years ago called Late Bloomer, which was a sort of autism memoir. And so Jo came to me and said, I'm interested in doing an anthology of autistic life writing. Are you keen to, maybe give me a letter of recommendation? And I was like, please let me be involved. So we really just wanted to, as two people who had published previously on the topic of autism, and for me, having published an autism memoir, I was kind of thinking, okay, well, how do I use this opportunity or the sort of privilege that I have with this platform that book has given me? And we both agreed we wanted to kind of throw the doors open and push the conversation forward a bit. And by doing that, kind of invite all of these different stories to the table, because even after all these years, there's still sort of very few autistic stories that are kind of permitted to be told. It's very rare that autistic people are allowed to be the authors of our own stories. So we sort of threw the doors open and had this incredible range of contributions submitted. We did an open call. And that's how this book came into being. We really just wanted to offer some new and different perspectives that maybe people hadn't considered in terms of autism and how autism manifests in people's lives. And we also wanted to, I guess, move the conversation forward. It felt like over the last 5 to 10 years, the kind of, monolithic autistic narratives were starting to take a new form. So once upon a time, it was the kind of Rain Man, Sheldon from Big Bang Theory type narrative, and then it became very much a kind of older white, mostly women, occasionally non-binary people being diagnosed later in life. And we said we would really like to step away from that medicalized model and this idea that autistic people can only talk about their experiences if it's through that lens of diagnosis, that deficit model. So we're really just so thrilled with this book and, so excited now that it is about to step in front of a new audience. And to do so, I'm so pleased to be able to stop talking and talk to our amazing contributors. So I'm going to start, Sarah, with you. I'm really interested in the themes of belonging in your essay, and I really like the way that you address them kind of tangentially and thematically, but the overall impression is very autistic. So you do mention, that journey to autistic self-knowledge in the piece, but it feels very much kind of woven in with your other experiences. How have you found your own place in the world through autistic self-knowledge?
Yeah, what a ginormous question.
I know, just an easy one to start with.
Just like, yeah, diving into the deep end. I guess I want to say, like what I'm doing in the essay itself, I feel like in my lived experience of like finding my place or relating to that notion of like belonging. I feel like it's still this thing I only know how to approach at a little bit of a slant. So if I think about my life before, autistic revelation, I feel like there would be all these like junctures where I'd run into the world and experience something like not fitting in, like, being in a social situation and being acutely aware that like I'm the one person in the room who's not understanding what everybody else is, or being in a situation where I'm seeing other people able to navigate, again, like social interactions in ways that just seem like impossible or inaccessible to me. And so those kinds of feelings of like not belonging. And I feel like pre, not just diagnosis, but like pre autism revelation, the only way I knew how to interpret those moments was through some pretty self disparaging lenses, right? Like, I'm bad, I'm broken.
Mm,
Oh, I'm not trying hard enough. It was like a really scary common one, or arguably worse, oh my God, I'm trying as hard as I possibly can and it's still not enough. Like, just all of these
yeah.
very, very ungenerous interpretations. I feel like what has changed now, I'm still those junctures are still there. I still experience those things. But I just feel so neutral about them. Like I'm not, it's not like, oh my God, what does this mean? It's like, oh yeah, I can't do it like that. Okay. Do I need to
Mm,
ask for something? Do I need to go somewhere else? Do I need to just like say no to more things? Like what used to feel really charged and like a sign of not belonging is just so much more neutral now. And I actually feel like that is kind of the gift of belonging, is just like being in situations where I have a need and it's like more often not a big deal than it used to be.
mm,
Um, yeah, more so than a sense of like, and now I belong. Like I don't know that I'll ever like feel that in some kind of big dramatic way. But it doesn't really, in the best way, like I don't care. I really value the neutrality.
mm. That's really powerful. It's funny. I think the only time I have that I finally belong is when I'm with other autistic people. And it makes sense all of a sudden. I think I naturally, and everybody can probably speak to this, gravitated to. I mean, I come from a very autistic family, and I had naturally gravitated to other autistic people. So when I really love that phrase, autistic revelation. When that happened for me, it was literally people said, "Oh, we're not surprised," or like we've had our suspicions. But I think,
Yeah.
have you found that process of, I guess, self advocacy is kind of hard won, or did you kind of come to it feeling prepared to do that for yourself?
Oh, it's super hard one. And I'm
Mm,
still like figuring out how to do that. And I still get nervous, and not to just immediately make this conversation really meta, but like, I feel like even like preparing for this, like I kind of feel like I was pretty noisy in the group emails about like, oh, what's the structure? What are you going to ask me? I want to know about, like, tell me as much as you can in advance. And I think I was aware of like a part of me that was like, don't do that. You're going to reveal yourself as like whatever I'm afraid of, be unprofessional or too needy, all those things. But it is practice to speak up for those things, and practice telling myself like, no, this is neutral, this is fine. And of course it is helpful. I appreciate you mentioning like the sort of kinship found with other neurodivergent folks. I have noticed like when I'm, because I think feeling imposter syndrome is just like a part of the late diagnosis process. Like I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody who is like late diagnosed who doesn't struggle with that in some way. I noticed that my imposter syndrome kind of like dissipates when I'm in situations like this, or when I'm interacting with other neurodivergent folks. And I find that really interesting to notice. Like, oh yeah, when I'm
mm,
being understood and like sharing kinship with people who move through the world in ways that mirror mine, like, yeah, I don't know that I've ever thought of it as belonging, but I think it is a kind of like, I don't need to like worry about myself as much.
mm. Yeah. I mean, I think, to bring it back to the book, that was something that, we really wanted this book to offer to people. And I think it seems to have landed, at least in Australia, that way, that people can read it and find that sense of belonging that maybe they don't have access to yet in real life, or that they're kind of looking for or kind of hoping to find. But I'm also interested, Sarah, you talk about yourself as having been a writer since you were 3, which is, I think, probably also very relevant to everyone in the room. Do you find that writing helps you process the world and your experiences of it?
Yes. Yeah. Like I just kind of want to like yell right now. Yes, like absolutely. And I think I think that has always been the case for me. And you know, I think that's not an uncommon way for writers to feel. Like I always have Joan Didion in my head, right? Who sort of famously said, like, I write entirely to figure out what I'm thinking. Like, I think a lot of writers feel that way. I do feel, for me, where it ties into neurodivergence is like what I think, what I feel, what I know. Those things are not always. I don't frequently experience those things as intuitive or obvious. I have to like figure those things out, including just the simple feeling of wanting something like that. And that seems to, relate to some interoception stuff. It seems to, it feels to me very tied to moving through the world in this like neurodivergent way. And so I think writing is both, it's like my oldest special interest. It is like such a source of like pure joy for me. And there's also like a survival component of it where I'm like, I experience the experience of self as very porous and unstable. And when I go to the page, there's like a temporary stabilizing thing that happens. And I can sort of figure out usually with a little more accuracy, what I feel, what I need, how something is impacting that I just can't in the 3-dimensional world. And, I think I spent a lot of time worrying that meant I was like bad at being human, or even worrying that meant I was like hiding behind the writing or something. And I'm so bored and tired of all that. Like, I just think writing is like a really accessible and accommodating form of communication that is easier for me, not to be weird, but like that if we were doing this in writing right now, it would be so much easier for me than this speaking out loud.
If this was a collaborative Google Doc, perfect.
Oh my God, yeah. And I'm so happy to be with all of you. And also I'm like, the screen keeps changing and I'm seeing all the names and I'm, and I'm like taking the shapes in my head and trying to put them in language that makes sense. It's just such a weird process. So, writing is both this like luxurious joy for me, and it's also like feels related to survival and like the healthiest and most basic coping that I do.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Lucy and Ivy, please feel free to jump in if you want. I know I would be deviating from our previously discussed.
I'm okay with that.
Does that resonate with you, the idea of writing to kind of understand your place in the world?
I think so, yeah. It's nice because I don't always say the thing that I want to say as articulately as I can, like first time. So it feels like it just gives me space to work it out and be my sort of natural, messy self. I don't know if you relate to that, Ivy, in any way, shape, or form.
I very much do. When I write my own manuscripts, I feel like, in a way, it feels like healing your own inner child, because you're writing about like things that you wish you understood when you were younger. Because I write young adult novels, and like for me, like when I was writing my most recent manuscript, I was like kind of crying, and I was like, this is more therapeutic than what 10 years of therapy have done for me.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think also, Sarah, you mentioned that it's a kind of accessible form of communication. I mean, I think irony of us talking about it in this current context, but I have always leaned on writing. I can pull myself together and talk for an hour, and I love to perform and I'm a big show off, but it's very draining for me. And in my day-to-day life, I'm a teacher at university, and so I can put on a show for, you know, that 2 or 4 hours. But then what that necessitates is the rest of the day not talking. You know, I'm in bed kind of recharging. And I think it's interesting that a lot of autistic people do gravitate towards writing as communication, whether that is literal, you know, writing, creative writing, or talking via text, you know, preferring email, leaning on images, leaning on emojis. Like, I think it's something that I find quite frustrating, in that idea of the kind of non-autistic gaze is this idea that, oh, but I read your essay, you know, you clearly are fine. Like, you're not having any difficulties at all. Like, it's a real kind of bind, because I think, you know, one of the autistic scholars whose work I love, Remy Yurgo, you know, talks a bit about that idea of autism as kind of as an invitation for people to question everything. It's like, you know, but if you say, oh, I'm autistic, or you write about being autistic, then there are all these other questions that rush in where it's like, oh, well, clearly, you know, you're not like this autistic person I know, or you know, there are all these kind of levels of disclosure, which are, you know, can be so tricky to navigate. But I'm interested to kind of bring it back to that idea of autistic belonging, Ivy, and talk about your essay, which I think is so beautiful, because it's a love story, you know, on a number of levels. You know, it's about learning to love your home, and then your new home, and then it's also a literal love story. And I think it's a really nice counterpoint to a lot of narratives that we do tend to see, particularly in screen media, where we're kind of given this idea that, you know, true romantic success, if you like, for an autistic person is to end up with a non-autistic person, is to be accepted into the non-autistic world. And I'm interested, was it important to you to really celebrate the autistic qualities that brought you and your partner together?
Yeah, definitely. I write a lot of my romance books about kind of like based off my relationship with my husband. So my husband's actually late diagnosed as well. He didn't know that he was autistic until I kind of pointed it out to him. So he was like diagnosed a year before I was. But yeah, like it's it was interesting to me because like I've had previous relationships, you know, before him, with, and I don't think like any of them were diagnosed as neurodivergent, or I think some of them were. But it was striking to me like the communication differences and like how safe I felt like with my husband compared to my other relationships, and like how much more like I felt like it was a lot more natural. And I kind of like wanted to explore that in my writing.
What was it that kind of stood out to you? Because I mean, I don't want to give it away to people who haven't read it, but it's so beautiful, the way you talk about, you know, his interest in the train system, and like just this, like, it's like bonding through info dumping.
Yeah, it was. Actually, like when he first started talking to me, like when a lot of guys talk to me, like the conversation usually veers towards like sexual harassment. So like with my husband, it was
Relatable.
completely different. It was like, oh, this guy's talking to me about trains, and he keeps talking to me about trains. I'm like, okay, this guy's different. And then I went to like meet him. We were online friends for a very long time. And I met him physically in the first time when I went to London. And like he gave me like this whirlwind tour of London. And that's like kind of how I fell in love with him. I think, yeah, he was just like very honest about everything. And like I felt like there wasn't like a mask or like any kind of like veneer. He was just very straightforward and honest. And I think that's what drew me to him.
Yeah. I think I can really relate to that. In you know, I have had some relationships with autistic people, and I think it's just a different communication style, but I think it's a different, you know, there is this emerging understanding, I think, of autistic culture and the ways in which, I mean, I don't like to lean on studies of autistic people because I think they often treat us as kind of zoo animals, but there have been some quite nice neuroaffirming studies recently that have found that, you know, the so-called communication deficit is not the autistic people. You know, it's when you bring a non-autistic person into the context of autistic people who are actually quite, I think, fluid at being able to kind of look at, you know, okay, who am I talking to? This other autistic person, what's their communication style? I'll drop into that. But it's the non-autistic people who are not able to do that. Because I have a lot of different autistic friends and colleagues with very different communication styles, different support needs, and I think we're actually quite good at reading the room in that way.
Yeah.
But that idea of being able to kind of bond without the mask, I think, is what is so powerful about your piece.
Yeah. And like I'm not trying to say that like, oh, autistic people can't be in successful relationships with like non-autistic people. But like in my personal experience, being with my husband, it felt like we are like very open to each other. Like the way we communicate with each other is like very open and honest and direct. And like sometimes he'll just be like, "Oh, I need some time alone," and we are like, "Okay, I get that," and we'll just like kind of like leave each other alone for a bit, and like we do that without like really any like hard feelings towards each other. So it's like we kind of like naturally understand each other's needs.
Yeah. Now, I was wondering if you did want to read a little excerpt from your piece, because I understand that there's a place name that you have been practicing, which I'm very excited to hear.
Sure. Yeah. Let me find it. So, okay. One day, while I was still unaware of my autism, I became online friends with Lover Padlian, who was obsessed with trains. I learned a lot through his frequent lectures about railway infrastructure, like British geography, which was not taught in my American education, and that Llanfair Pwllgwynedd Gogereth Pont Cecilio Gogogoch is a train station in Wales that describes the name of the village, its local topography, and some buildings nearby. That quirky fact alone was reason enough for me to visit his country, which I had not taken an interest in before. So I signed up for a study abroad program in London.
Yay! Incredible. Spoken like a true Welsh person. You mentioned, you're also a YA romance author, which I love. And your debut manuscript features a selectively mute girl who falls in love with an autistic polyglot. Do you feel like things have changed over the last decade or so in terms of readers' interest in seeing a diverse range of experiences represented on the page?
I hope it has. But I think honestly, I think it did. I think for me, like what really like opened my eyes to the fact that there's like an audience for like autistic stories was when I saw A Kind of Spark by Elle McNicol. I think that was released in like 2020. And like that was the first time I've seen an autistic girl like in a not like presented in like a non-stereotypical way in books and in the media. I think there was like also a BBC adaptation, a CBBC adaptation of her book. And then later on, I had like a friend who worked at a bookstore, and she was like, "Oh, have you read this book?" And it was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Wang, which is I think she's Vietnamese, and she wrote a story about an autistic woman like falling in love with a sex worker. I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And then like
I love that book.
Yeah, and then like when I started writing my manuscript and I was like finding comps for my manuscripts, I was like, oh, there's more. So there was like something more by Jackie Khalila, who's like Palestinian and autistic as well, and she wrote about a young Palestinian autistic girl in her YA romance book. And I think there are more and more. I think there, and I've joined like writing communities on Discord as well, and like I've noticed that like a lot of people like writing autistic characters into their books. I think that's pretty awesome. And I think I think it's partially because like people are being more aware of it, or probably being more, like more open about it. And to me, like that's a good thing. And I think not just autism, but like for me, like as a Chinese person, I see like a lot more books about Chinese people out there. Whereas before, like for me, growing up in America, I didn't really see like Chinese people like I think I read like The Joy Luck Club, and like that was the only Chinese movie since 1980, and then there was like Crazy Rich Asians came out, and then suddenly you see like lots of Asian representation in the media, and I think it's like growing and growing.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about YA too is it seems to and Lucy and Sarah also, please feel free to jump in if you like. I think what's interesting about YA too is that intersectionality of the experiences that are being represented. So I think, you know, once upon a time in traditional publishing, there was this idea that you can talk about one of those things, you know, like we'd love a book about a Chinese experience, or we'd love a book about an autistic person, but we don't need to combine them. And, you know, you see that too in a lot of different YA books where you will see, you know, their sort of top line themes, and they'll be looking at all of these different experiences that a person can have of the world. And I think it's really interesting that it's the young adult industry that's sort of leading the charge in that way.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like talking about intersectionality, like autism, I think could probably be interpreted different ways in different cultures, and like people from different cultures will have, like, you know, autism is already a spectrum, but
Yeah.
I think autistic people from different cultures also have like those different experiences.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that was something with the book that we really wanted to, you know, we were very careful when we did our first kind of call for contributions. We were like, we'd really love to hear from people from, you know, different backgrounds, different experiences, who have intersecting experiences of different, you know, marginalized identities. And there are some really, you know, incredible pieces in here for those of you who haven't read the book yet. Like Khadija talks about growing up in Sierra Leone, you know, as a refugee. And again, yeah, that cultural idea of being different, you know, not necessarily being kind of understood in the same way that we might understand, you know, being autistic in a different context. And, you know, CB Mako talks about their experience of growing up under a dictatorship. It's really like, I mean, you know, the book is as diverse as we were able to make it, because obviously, you know, the limitation is who decides to submit their work. But I think, you know, I'm really pleased that we've been able to kind of just expand those conversations a little bit by offering those perspectives. That, yeah, maybe I think in the broader media context, you know, there is still this understanding of autism being primarily kind of, you know, theorized as this thing that still, you know, people think, oh, it's just a little white boys kind of issue. So yeah, I think it's so important that people kind of are able to see those different experiences represented on the page. I'm also interested, just briefly, Ivy, like what has your experience of the publishing world been so far as an autistic person? Because I know you have this manuscript which you're looking to kind of shop around. Like, do you find that there are barriers to access from an autistic perspective?
Yeah, I would describe my querying experience so far as like a bit chaotic. Yeah, for the record, I don't have an agent. So if there are any agents out there, please let me know.
I know, I'm hoping that there's many in the room, that it's like 50% agents.
That would be awesome. Just like, you know, hit me up. Anyway, so yeah, I actually I wrote a manuscript. I've written like 2 manuscripts. So the first manuscript that I tried to query was last year, and I received 9 requests in total for that manuscript, which is quite good, I think, for, you know, someone's first time ever querying. And then the rejections came in, and it was interesting because like they all had the same feedback, which was like, oh, it felt like a bit too like there was like a lot of telling instead of showing. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. Because I feel like there was actually an essay in the anthology about versus showing, and that like completely opened my eyes to the way that like maybe autistic people might have like different writing styles. And like I influence that quite a bit in my book. But yeah, so, you know, I thought that was interesting, and then I joined like, you know, writing communities online, and I met like a lot of other writers, a lot of other authors, and I learned a lot from people. So I think my writing has improved. I hope so. I actually recently just signed up for a romance mentorship program called Smooch Pit. So I got like 2 mentors, potential mentors who like wanna, you know, potentially mentor me. So that's very
amazing. I'm glad that you mentioned that essay. Actually, it's Nisha Dolan's essay. Show Don't Tell is Broken. Like, because I think that's really true. I think a lot of us, particularly those of us who have written professionally or are in those kind of circles, we often receive feedback which pertains to the ways in which we write, which could be seen as autistic. You know, like as a critical autism studies scholar, researcher, whatever. I mean, that's kind of what I'm interested in. And that came through my own experience as a screenwriter of being told, I would be told, oh, we love this script, it's really funny, but we don't know what the lead is feeling. Like, it's not clear what her emotions are, or, there's too much repetition in this, or why are you always quoting other movies? As I kind of came to, I guess, understand myself more, but also through doing, a PhD and writing this book, working on this book and writing my own book, like, I started to recognize, oh, I'm actually embodying my experiences as an autistic person on the page. So, in my day-to-day life, there's a lot of echolalia. I sometimes communicate almost entirely in like movie quotes. And so I started to go, oh, I'm doing that in my screenwriting. And I think, there's some really beautiful ways in which writing can be kind of autistic in form and not just, about autism. Does that resonate with any of you in terms of your own writing practices?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like constantly dictated by, I mean, of course, I'm dictated by my brain. Like, it is the only organ that you need to write. So of course, like, it's going to impact. I always get really frustrated when people are like, don't make it your personality. It's like, but my brain is literally like my personality. So it just feels like such a I don't know what you want me to do. But I totally resonate with that. I think it's about learning to work with your brain rather than against it. And that's been kind of like my biggest learning curve with my writing, is like learning that the things that are kind of like pulling me back or drawing me back, or my pitfalls, are like actually not pitfalls but strengths. And rather than, it's not, it's kind of what Sarah said earlier, you're not broken, you just have a completely different way of doing things or seeing the world or problem solving. And that's something to embrace rather than work against, I think.
Sarah, I see you nodding.
Yeah, probably like really enthusiastically. Yeah, and Clem, too, we had like some very, very brief one-on-one interactions, and like your contribution to the anthology really, I think, helped crystallize something that had been working its way to the surface in my brain for a long time, around like, oh yeah, all these things I've always been drawn to in writing: echo and repetition, braidedness, tangents, the way that like my brain, which is like rhizomatic, like you can demonstrate that, you can like invite that form onto the page in this beautiful way that is harder and more confusing in conversation. And I'm even thinking about, some of the times where, and is this autism, is this style and preference? I don't know, maybe it's all of them. Like I as a writer and as a reader, I like a text that like the process and the structure of it is part of it. Like I'm bored by something where someone's like figured something out and then they're like, here you go, here's my conclusion. It's like, no, I want all the stuff away. And I feel like maybe that's like a bottom-up processing preference. I don't know, but there's something where I like want all of that. And I tend to do that in my writing. And I think about, even in the last 6 months, like multiple times where I had some feedback that was really hard for me to receive, and had multiple people tell me, oh, there's like so much throat clearing here. And I've come to think like, I think for some of us, the throat clearing is like part of the valuable expression. I think some things are valuable, and it's just this weird like neuro majority assumption that those things need to be cleaned up or like used sparingly or something. I don't know. Yeah. So
yeah, I think, Remy Yergo, the autistic critic that I was talking about before, like they talk about the, too much of the too much of the too much, that, that with autistic expression, often it's about, things kind of spilling out. And I think I really resisted that for a long time. I mean, I had to write, also before I had that autistic self-knowledge, I was working in digital media. And so it was very, short and to the point. It was like, we need 800 words on this. Like there was no room to kind of let any of that out. It's been really interesting since I have come to that understanding of myself as autistic, and also stopped writing in digital media, that it's just like, blah, like now it's like these sentences that my PhD supervisors are always telling me off. It's like, this sentence is too long. Like, But I was like, but I have to, it's like you say, Sarah, it's like the working out. It's like I have to get through to the point, and find these kind of seemingly divergent connections on my way there. But I'm very, it's very much a process where I will eventually, it's a very kind of elegant, kind of bookending process. But you're right. I think that kind of, connective tissue is really important. Yeah, it's just, I could talk about autistic writing all day. But Lucy, actually reading your essay was really interesting for me, because if I had been able to keep a diary as a child, I think I tried once and it lasted a day and a half. It would have been almost exactly what is in your chapter, which is, I want to be a fish, I want to be a mermaid. I couldn't, it's like, I think what's been really interesting as an editor in this book is having the same experience that readers do, which is reading the essays and going, oh my God, me too. Or I had no idea anybody else had that experience. What do you think it was about that watery world that like really connected with you as a kid?
I mean, God knows. But I was like absolutely obsessed, and I got into so much trouble for like I actually like, sometimes I'm like, how did they not see that like this? I think it's because it wasn't trains and it was mermaids instead. They were like, nah, she's just weird, like
just girl stuff.
Just girly stuff, just girly things. Definitely not just girly things. Like I had like books. I was like 7, man, and I had like books on like the like intense biology of like mermaids that people had tried to put together on like the deepest parts of like, forums, and like I just don't think it's normal for like a 7-year-old girl to be keeping such detailed records. But I spent a lot of time in the bath trying to like do potions that would turn me into a fish, a lot. And I was just, like it was just everything. It was the air I breathed. And yeah, it's so fascinating kind of looking back on it, because it truly didn't occur to me that it's that autistic revelation thing again. It just didn't occur to me that like it was possible for me to be autistic again, because there's like such a dangerous narrative and stereotype around like what an autistic person looked like. And it is like, unfortunately, that stereotype is male, it's white, it's like a specific set of interests that don't always align with kind of the people who are like in marginalized groups or like from different parts of life. So it was a massive revelation to me that I was autistic, even though I was experiencing exactly the same things that a diagnosed autistic person was having. Like I look back and as a child, I was having meltdowns where I'd physically harm myself and have those awkward, messy moments, but they weren't seen as meltdowns. They were seen as me being a little diva and throwing tantrums and like all of those kind of like negative qualities that people attribute to, a person who looks like or identifies as a woman. Which is deeply unfortunate, because when that happens, you internalize all those behaviors and you can't possibly pathologize them in any kind of way, because they're just seen as faults and negative things. So, I got my diagnosis a couple of years ago, and it genuinely saved my life, because it just made me it just transformed the way that I viewed myself. And I think I'm much nicer to myself now, and like much more understanding and also much more curious. So weird segue to go from like mermaids to like deep life stuff, but
that's what it is. I mean, I used to get in the bath with goggles on and just like try and stay under the water for as long as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found this incredible letter that I wrote. We had this kids show here called Ocean Girl. I don't know if that made its way onto the BBC, but
love that show. Okay.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So when I must have been, I don't know, 10 or 11, and Ocean Girl was on, and I wrote, and I guess I didn't send it because I found it many years later, but I wrote this letter to the producer, who actually happened to, I think the production company was not that far from our house, which is how I knew what the address was. And it was literally, hey, Mr., whatever your name is, just wondering if you ever need a new Ocean Girl, like here are all I'm very good at swimming underwater. Like it was just like this pure, and you're right. It's that thing of those intense interests, but they're not light switches or, trains, the things that we're sort of, socialized to think are a bit weird to be interested in. And I think that that's true for a lot of autistic people, and not just, you know, women, non-binary people. Like, I think I definitely have friends who are male, you know, even like white male autistics who don't have that so-called kind of traditional presentation, who slip through the cracks because they're interested in something else, or they don't have those behaviors which are, you know, or maybe they're more outgoing, you know, maybe they're kind of quite gregarious, which I think often is the case for young autistic people. You know, this idea that we are necessarily kind of withdrawn is not always accurate. And it's all, I think, like so many things, autism is so dynamic, you know, and our experience of the world differs depending on the world that we're in. So, you know,
it's so fascinating as well, because what you think of as being somebody with autism, like sometimes I think people really struggle to wrap their heads around the fact that so many people who are undiagnosed autistic have like drug addictions or alcohol addictions, because that's messy and unclean and unkept, and it's like just the complete polar opposite of what we're led to believe is this stereotype. But actually, like, autistic people are actually the most messy people. So,
I don't know what you're talking about. But it's very true. And I look back on my like 20s and 30s, and I was really, you know, I would say kind of borderline, you know, harmful alcohol use particularly. And it is very much a common thread, particularly with people who don't have that access to autistic self-knowledge or autistic revelation, because, you know, it makes you feel I mean, like, you look back and you go, oh my God, I was not even close to normal, but it sort of it can take some of the edge off. And I think it's true. I think that idea of the autistic person who is kind of challenging the kind of so-called norms of autism is I think still quite confronting for some people.
Definitely.
Like, did you find, because I know I did all my research on everyone, and something that I read that you said, which I was really drawn to, was that you said that a good guiding principle as a writer is to be vulnerable and write honestly about the things that scare you. You know, you're a novelist. Your incredible book, The Lamb, is just so stunning. But I'm interested, did it feel vulnerable on a different level to write first person, you know, about your own experience as an autistic person?
That's a really interesting question, because I didn't have my diagnosis when I wrote The Lamb, and The Lamb came out and it sort of converged with me getting my diagnosis, which was really fascinating, because like so many autistic people came to me at the signing table and said, like, I just really saw myself in Margot, like, she's so clearly autistic. And I never say she's autistic, but I think when you just put like a certain amount of honesty into a character, and also just like, that's how I see the world. So of course, like, my perspective is never going to be neurotypical, because I don't know what that's like. I've never lived that. And I don't think I ever will, and I hope that I never do. But yeah, it's fascinating, because I think even when you don't mean for it to slip through, it does, and it naturally will, because we're all ultimately kind of, even if you don't mean to, you're writing from a place of your own knowledge bank. So if your knowledge bank is autistic as fuck, your writing is going to be autistic as fuck. So, so yeah, it was a joy to write The Lamb. And I think I've talked a lot about like the relationship between being autistic and writing horror, and like why I love horror so much as a genre. And I just think that horror is kind of the perfect genre to encapsulate the autistic experience, because it's such an overstimulating genre, like sensory, the sound, the building, the anxious stings of music, like all of that, like just that clever build of like sensory manipulation is just like literally me going to the shop. So like you know,
me on the tram.
yeah, just like me in day-to-day life. It's just, I find it like such an expressive, relatable genre, because even though the stereotype is that we're not expressive people, we experience the world in such a highly expressive way that is totally unique to being autistic. So I just think that kind of comes through. It lends itself quite naturally to that space, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, and also I guess Ivy, this goes for you. And Sarah, I don't know if you write fiction actually, but I actually find writing fiction more exposing than writing first person. Like if I'm in non-fic mode, whatever, I'll tell you anything. Like, but I actually really struggle, you know, as someone who's trying to move into fiction after years and years of writing creative non-fic. That to me is like, oh, you're reading my diary. Like it's really, I don't know what it is. It's funny. It's like in kind of sharing what's in my imagination. Like that feels too intimate somehow. Like I'm interested, Ivy. Do you feel, you know, as a YA author, like does that feel like a kind of, you know, natural way for you to process the world? Like how did it feel writing your own story as opposed to, you know, a fictional story which sort of draws on your own experience?
Yeah, so I guess there is kind of like the benefit of like saying, oh, this is fiction, like you can like make up things about your character and be like, oh, that's not really me. But I do find that when I write my own characters and I have like other people giving me feedback, sometimes they'll say things like, oh, like what this character did is unlikable. And I'll just be like, I'll take that like really personally.
Yes.
It's like, oh, that's like an autistic thing that she did, and that's what, you know, I would do in that situation. So it's like, oh, okay, so that's not likable. So I guess it's hard to like kind of separate yourself if you're I put myself in my books because I write autistic books. I'm writing from my own experiences. So it's like I guess it's kind of hard to like separate that. But yeah, like in terms of whether it's like more vulnerable writing fiction or nonfiction, I think for me, like the line's kind of blurry because I am writing like an own voices book. But I guess there are like, you know, like I honestly like make up a lot of things in my fiction books, and so it's like, oh, you know, like I'm not actually a polyglot, or like my husband's not. Well, he's a wannabe polyglot, and it's like so.
Is he a trained system polyglot?
He's really into learning German right now, and he's trying to like learn a million different languages.
Incredible.
Yeah.
What a legend.
Yeah, I drew inspiration from like that interest of his. But
it's really interesting that you mention, you know, when you get feedback about something that you recognize as being kind of a uniquely autistic experience. Like I think, I don't know, Lucy, if you experienced this through the kind of editing process of The Lamb, or, you know, anything else that you're working on. But I think, you know, it's really interesting because they're often the things that I'm really drawn to as a reader. Like Ivy, you mentioned Helen Huang's book, The Kiss Quotient. Like there's this amazing moment early on where the protagonist is just like catching up with her parents. And, you know, the scene is very kind of dialogue heavy. Actually, they're talking about, you know, her job and like where she's at in her world. But there's this amazing moment where Helen Huang writes about the character just noticing that like she's eating, I think, eggs Benedict or something, and she notices the yolk running together with the sauce and I'm just like, that is it's such a specific like autistic kind of sensory moment. And yeah, I suppose, you know, in another context you could write something like that, but to me I really was like, autism moment. Like it was, I felt very kind of seen by that. So I'm sort of, you know, is that something that is kind of tricky as a writer when you get feedback about things that are, I mean, I guess as autistic writers, everything we write is autistic, but you know, if you sort of detect something being more kind of specifically autistic in your writing, like is it hard to kind of advocate for that as an autistic writer, to say, no, this is an intentional thing that I'm doing?
I think it's interesting because I think if you are a woman, I think people will just be like, oh, she's so observant and like she's so like, oh, look how like other like old soul, like so otherworldly, like, so I don't even think people register it as like even as being autistic. But I have to say I do think I've been like very, very lucky because my team in the US and the UK have just been like very curious with me and are always so open to like listening to me yap. I was on an editorial meeting that was about a book that turned into like a deep science lesson where I started talking about like how the Titan submersible broke apart because of the wrong textures and delamination, and they were just like, how did we get here? But you just kind of accept it into the process of being curious and writing, because it's just, it all kind of comes together, I think. But it's a really interesting mix of like I think when your team know you and have those personal interactions with you where they can kind of see your autism on full display, they will be so much more understanding of like through the editorial process. But I think if you don't have those, like, if you come into contact with people who don't have experience with autism and don't experience your autism, they will not understand like the places kind of your autism comes through in your work. Whereas like my editors have seen me being really autistic and know where that is coming through in my work and kind of have an understanding of who I am as a person, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, it was something that also I'll just say, I'm just looking at the clock. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat because we're drifting into our Q&A time. But it was one of the things that, you know, when we were editing some of that, do you love the way I keep picking up this book? Like if I talk about it, no one will know what I'm talking about. When we were editing Someone Like Me, you know, that was something that we were, woo! Screenshot. It was one of the things that we were really conscious of as editors because we wanted to create a kind of neuroaffirming editing experience because I think a lot of people had either as professional writers or as you know, kind of emerging writers had that experience of being edited in a way that was not, you know, neuroaffirming. And so it was really important to us to say to the writers, hey, when you say, you know, XYZ, is that intentional or is this sentence just like that, you know? And sometimes people were like, I don't know, you know, but occasionally they would be like, yes, I wanted that sentence to be super long, or it's meant to have that many, you know, parentheses in it. And even, I guess, like the editing process itself. I mean, we had some, you know, some contributors who we did their edits via voice notes. So they would like record what they wanted to add, you know, send it to me, I'd transcribe it, I'd, you know, put it back together, send it back to them again. You know, some people got their feedback over the phone. You know, other people just had a so-called normal editing experience where it was just like, you know, we're kind of pinging the drafts back and forward. But I think that was something that, because Joe and I are both autistic writers, you know, and we'd had some less than great experiences in the industry, you know, we really didn't want to kind of recreate those barriers to access. And I think, you know, I hope that, you know, Lucy, it's great to hear that, you know, your team kind of gets you. Like, I think I want that for all autistic writers. Like, you know, Ivy, for the many high-powered agents who are in the room, like, I really hope that, you know, you end up in a situation where you feel, you know, safe as a writer. And I imagine that's something that you are kind of looking for too. Like, as you are querying, you know, are you kind of thinking, does this feel like a safe, you know, space for me to work within? Is that something that's like on your radar?
Yeah, definitely. You know, they say that you need an agent who will champion your book and like be your biggest fan. And I think for me, it's important to have an agent who understands neurodiversity, who understands autism, like understands what I'm doing with my book, because like my book it's not just like some love story. It's not just some, you know, like piece of fiction. It's about like getting other people like me to see themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I really hope it gets published. Like everything that I've read about it, I'm like, I love this book. Oh, question. Okay. Emily is asked, what is your favorite representation of autism in the media? So books, film, TV, etc. Who wants to go first?
That is the hardest question because
I know. I'm just like, can I even think of one?
That's not like the Big Bang Theory. Like,
I know.
Oh my God. I mean, for me, I'm just going to say Doctor Who, even though I know it's not canon, but just because that's like a piece of media that like made me feel really seen as a kid. Like and I think specifically in terms of the characterization, it was like the Doctor's endless ramblings and idea, like, and like the curiosity and the sort of ticking to things that they're really interested in, and like, you know, watching their ears prick up physically like when they were interested in something like that, because that was like extremely relatable content, even though it's not canon. But that for me, that's probably it.
Great choice. Ivy?
I don't think it's official, but I think Wednesday Addams in that new Netflix series, I think she might be autistic. And I think
you're not the first person I've heard say that.
Yeah, like I've seen a lot of like speculation online saying like, is Wednesday autistic? And I think it's likely because I think Tim Burton is on the spectrum as well, and I think he's probably like inserted his own qualities into his version of Wednesday Addams. So I think it's completely plausible. And I just like, I mean, everyone loves Wednesday Addams, and I think it's it's, cool seeing that representation of her, in the media, and like just it's cool seeing people saying like, oh, I love Wednesday, I want to be like her. It's like,
yes. Yeah, definitely. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, there's this show on Netflix called Mo that I think everybody should watch. It's the main character and his family. They're Palestinian. It's just an kind of a miraculous show to be just available on Netflix right now about him navigating immigration and deportation as a Palestinian man. I mean, it's really like everybody should watch it. And his brother in the show is autistic, and I think there were some things about, I mean, I think what's most exciting about that is like the representation of like, we were speaking to this earlier, like that intersection of like, oh, this can be about being Palestinian, being neurodivergent. Like, oh my God, we can have both of those things in one piece of media. Yeah, I think it's doing some really important special things. Yeah, I really recommend it.
Yeah, I agree. For me, here we go, curveball. So I let me take you back to 1988. There were two movies released, and one of them ended up being the like monolithic depiction of autism, which was Rain Man. But I went back when I was writing my book because I was like, when I was little, I used to go to the video shop and I would hire The Boy Who Could Fly like again and again and again. And I sort of only had vague memories of it. And I went back and I watched it again. This is a couple of years ago now. And I was like, oh my God, this is like number one autism movie. So for those of you who haven't seen it, The Boy Who Could Fly, this movie was actually written by the guy who played, I think, Michael Myers, or like one of the famous horror monsters. But it's about this girl moves in next door to this kid who everyone at school is like, he's autistic, he doesn't have any friends, also he can fly. Like, and it's a really interesting, because if you look at it next to Rain Man is like, this autistic person can never live in the real world. Like the ultimate takeaway from Rain Man is it's good for him to be institutionalized. Whereas in The Boy Who Could Fly, that is like the antagonist. It's like, we don't want him to go to be put in this institution. And the way they deal with his autism in the film is so sensitive. It's kind of incredible that it came out when it did. And this young woman is told, she's kind of paired up with him at school. It's like, listen, please, can you help this kid? No one's hanging out with him. And there's this really interesting sequence where initially she's like trying to get him to talk and like trying to play basketball with him, and all the classic tropes of like throwing the basketball and he just lets it drop. And then there's this moment where she's like, I give up. I'm going to just, vibe with him on his level. And it's so beautiful. So she just like, they just start like info dumping about planes and like reading about things that fly. And, he doesn't speak, he stays mute for the whole film. But it's just it was such an interesting and kind of affirming depiction of autism that I kind of was so taken aback by it, because I was like, there must be a reason why I loved this film so much. I mean, yeah, it's cool that he can fly also, but it's also like, it's not that like autism gives him magical powers. It's, again, in a weird way, it's like a sort of intersection. It's like he's autistic and he can fly. Like, so yeah, if you're out there and you find a VHS copy of The Boy Who Could Fly, please buy it. All right, I'm jumping back into the comments. Question. Do any of you feel the autistic sense of justice, and how might you feel that influences your writing? Anyone want to jump in?
Yes. And I think everyone else here I can sense is also a yes. I don't want to speak for anybody. Do you not feel like, I don't know if you guys feel like this, but I'd be so curious to know if you guys feel like if it's just because we have such a sort of black and white understanding of like how we picture a certain issue. Like for me, something is either right or wrong, and like I will sit firmly either side of that line and believe in that one thing so fully. And that's not even just for kind of like justice issues, but like more widely across like the spectrum of other stuff too, including like my interests. Like I hate tomato and I'll never like it, versus like, my interest for like I like pasta and that's good. I feel like that spreads. Do you guys feel the same, Ivy? Like, what's your...
Yeah, I was actually just discussing this with an autistic friend the other day, and she said that she thinks that autistic people probably feel like physical like revulsion when they are told to like go against their morals or to go against their principles. And I'm not sure if like you guys feel that way, because like for me, when I feel like, oh, I'm like being forced to lie about something, or if I'm being told to like do something wrong, I feel like trembling. Like I feel very
Mm.
hot. I feel very trembling, and I'm like I can't, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a big yes from me too. And I'm just thinking maybe it's the writer Julie Green. I know I've read somewhere an autistic writer kind of reflecting on how part of what is so complicated about this, the black and white stuff, is like you don't understand sometimes how much thinking and assessing and analyzing has gone into those like black and white, like stubborn opinions. It's like often it is the result of like turning something over and looking at it from like every single possible angle.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think I find it really hard to respect these sorts of dominant hierarchies that some people seem to just accept as the natural way of things, but also meaningful. Like, I think that's been something that I have really struggled with, particularly in academia. Like, there are kind of, I feel like I'm meant to defer to certain people, and I'm like, why? And that it's really, I have to kind of keep a lid on it. But I think I agree with everybody. Like, I think that it is a really interesting part of the autistic experience, and I think it does influence, particularly, as a nonfiction writer, like what I choose to write about. On writing, another question from Louise: would you ever consider creating another anthology? This book is so special, I need more. Yes, please, if anyone's listening. But actually, what I would love, I would love an anthology of autistic fiction, because I think the way, like, it's always fantastic to hear about people's direct experiences, but I'm really interested in the way that autism, inflects creative writing more broadly. Like, I think that would be really interesting. I don't know. How does everyone else feel? Should we launch it now?
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, thanks, Louise. Verve Books, if you're listening. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing. Like, someone like me, like I said, it's as diverse as it could be. It has the voices in it that we were able to kind of table, and I really hope that it's the first of many. If not kind of squired by us, then I hope other publishers kind of recognize the need for books like this, but also the interest in them. I think it's really important. It was really important. Yay, Verve! It was really important to us, I think, to lean on the fact that it's not just a worthy book because it's good to listen to autistic people, although that is true. It's also just good writing. Like, I think that was a really, particularly for me, with that interest in autistic, in autistic poetics and autistic literature. Like, I think I really wanted us to lean on the fact that also it has literary weight. I think sometimes with anthologies, particularly if they're nonfiction, there's a kind of understanding of it being, oh, isn't it nice that these people have gotten the chance to share their stories? But, with this, it's like, I mean, so many of these pieces, I kind of have, talked about unlearning, what I kind of how I had to mask as a writer in the kind of digital sphere. And that I had started to kind of break that down and write in ways that I felt were like hugely experimental. And then I read some of the pieces in this and I was like, man, I'm small fry. Like, I am really coming in at the ground floor. Like, there are writers in here who are kind of operating on such an incredibly like complex level in terms of, how they get the words on the page. Like, I'm just kind of flipping through this. There's so many great examples. Like, there's the when everyone else has a conversation, the Anna Whately and Kate Gordon one, which is like in like dual columns. There are so many pieces in this book that just are like so kind of fascinating to me, and really, Ange Crawford's one, like, I don't know if you can see, it's like, that's like the inside of my brain. So yeah, I really hope that people will also recognize the fact that autistic writers can kind of, bring something really interesting to the page that is really special, that is in the like specifically autistic way that they write, I think. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in. I feel like I just got in a real tear there. We finally reached the monologue time of the book event.
Nothing to add, just big slay, and I can't wait to read it.
Can we please put that, if we go to a second edition, I want to put that on the front cover. Big slay, Lucy Rose. I'm just checking to see if there are any other questions. I don't think there are. So, I mean, I don't know. Does anybody like, you know what? Let's end on a sentimental note. I'm interested, you know, if you were able to take this book, get in a time machine, you know, get in the TARDIS and like go back and give it to your, you know, 10, 12, 15-year-old self, like what would this have meant to you to have a book like this available to you, if you can put it into words?
I think for me, I actually like the possibility of me becoming autistic came up when I was like 17 years old. It was when an autistic, I think this is probably common, but like an autistic person who's like known me for a while was like, Ivy, you're autistic. And I'm like, oh, like, what's that? And I think if someone gave me that book when I was a teenager, I would have been like, I probably would have been very confused. And it wasn't until I learned what masking was that like everything like made sense to me. And I feel like it opened a whole can of worms. And I was like, oh, okay, so if I had this when I was a teenager, I probably would have been confused, but I probably would have like seen myself, and it probably would have like made me explore things a lot more seriously.
Beautiful. Who wants to go next?
Yeah,
Sarah.
I'll jump in. I'm going to answer this question at a little bit of a slant. I have a hard time. I think it's my imagination doesn't always do well with these sort of like what ifs. It is really hard for me to imagine like how it would have felt to have received this book when I was younger. What I can say though, from more of a like a therapeutic IFS parts work perspective, is I actually do think there are young parts of me that are really benefiting from reading this book, and there's some old stuff that is being healed just by even like being a part of a conversation like this. So I think it's doing its job.
I'm trying to think of an answer still. I think what everybody's different, everybody's brain is different, and I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone else and get it wrong. I know that I became so obsessive about my work that I never stopped. I slept like 3 hours a night and everything was about my work and doing well. And I was such an overachiever, especially at university. And everyone was like, oh my God, she's just got so much energy and she's like so high achieving, but they didn't see like what was happening underneath, like inside my body as a result of all of that. And I think, I mean, I didn't even suspect that I was autistic until I was like 26, which is still quite young in terms of the grand scheme of what is hopefully a long life. We'll see what happens. The world's quite crazy. But I think I would like to think that if she'd read this and seen herself, maybe she just would have slowed down and done like a Vienna Billy Joel, you know, for just a beat. I think lots of people, whether you are non-binary, whether you identify as a woman, whether you identify as a man, whatever, when you don't know what's wrong with you, you tend to bury it in like compulsivity, impulsivity, especially if you've got like a bleed of autism and ADHD. And like I mean, I was almost diagnosed with like everything in the DSM-5 except for autism before we came to the autism diagnosis. And so you just sort of bury it in like really self-destructive behavior. And so I think I would just hope that she was a bit more chill.
What a beautiful note to end on. I love that. Yeah, I think, you know, I think also, Sarah, what you mentioned is really true. I think, you know, we don't have to go back in time for a book like this to be helpful. And, you know, even as an editor, like I said, it has been, here I go reaching for the book again. It has been such a special experience reading these pieces and being able to, you know, play a small part in getting them out into the world. So, you know, I'm really excited that everybody, you know, a whole new world now is going to be able to read these pieces. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you everybody for taking time out of, I assume, everybody's Friday night, not your Saturday morning, unless anybody else is a maniac like me. It's currently 5:13 a.m. The birds are singing. But yeah, thank you for coming. I believe this is being recorded too, so it will pop up online if you or anyone you know wasn't able to make it, or you know, like me, you take a long time to process things. You'll be able to watch it again. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Lucy, Ivy, and Sarah, and thank you to the Verve team. And go out and read it, and go out and, you know, give it to people for Christmas. Like, I think I really am excited for this book to make its way into autistic hands first and foremost, but I think it will be really, you know, instructive for some non-autistic people to read as well. And I hope it's a big hit in libraries, because it has been here. So, you know, if you've got a local library, go there and tell them to get a copy in. That's it. Thank you, everyone. Yay. Also, please, all agents, contact Ivy. I know you're in here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.